The sun was still bleeding up over Clearwater Lake when I heard the first crack. Not the kind of soft pop wood makes when it settles, this was sharper, like a rifle shot echoing off the water. I dropped my coffee on the porch rail and sprinted down to the dock. Half the planks were dangling into the lake like snapped bones. Someone had taken a pry bar to the bolts during the night. My grandfather's dock, the one we'd rebuilt together when I was 12, now sagged in the water, ruined. I stood there barefoot in the frost, staring at the wreckage while loons called across the mist. A copper taste crept into my mouth, not from fear, but from the old anger I hadn't felt since I walked off my last job site 2 years ago. Retiring was supposed to mean peace. Instead, I'd been drafted into a war I didn't start. "Nice morning for a little demolition," a voice called from behind me. Delilah Cromwell stepped out of her pearl-white Escalade, heels clicking on the gravel like gunshots. 58 years old, hair lacquered into something sharp enough to cut glass, she looked more like a corporate CEO than a lake neighbor. Her blazer was worth more than my truck. On the lapel gleamed the polished badge of her new kingdom, President, Lakeside Estates HOA. "You're trespassing," I said flatly. She smiled like a cat discovering a crippled mouse. "Oh, Marcus. You're still clinging to this shack?" She waved at my grandfather's cabin, hand-hewn logs, stone chimney, screen porch like it was a pile of junk left on the curb. "Community standards are rising. That dock? Unsafe. Unsightly. Brings down everyone's property value." I glanced at the mangled boards. Funny. It was safe yesterday. Delilah didn't even flinch. "The compliance window closes Friday. Fix it or lose it. Simple as that." She turned on her heel and left as quickly as she came, Escalade tires spitting gravel against my truck door. Her vanity plate Rule 1 winked in the rising sun. I just stood there, fists clenched so hard I felt the old scar across my palm ache. Pop's voice came back to me from decades ago, "Marcus, if somebody wants your land bad enough to play dirty, find out why. There's always more to it than they're telling you." That morning wasn't about a dock. It was about control. And Delilah Cromwell wasn't the type to settle for less than everything. By noon, I'd already gotten 3 phone calls from neighbors I'd known for decades, polite but cold, asking why I was refusing to cooperate. By sunset, someone had spray-painted "comply or leave" across my mailbox in neon orange. I scrubbed it off with steel wool until my fingers bled, but the stain wouldn't disappear completely. That night, I sat in Pop's old leather chair, staring at the fishing rods propped in the corner and wondering if retirement was going to be one long siege. I'd spent 30 years crawling through trenches, building power grids for 3 counties, and I thought I'd earned this quiet. But people like Delilah don't leave you alone. They circle. They test. They push. And if you give an inch, they'll take the whole damn lake. I didn't know then how deep her game went. I didn't know about the shell companies, the phantom landscaping contracts, or the cash buyers who always seemed to appear right after she crushed another homeowner into selling. All I knew was that a war had started on my shoreline and I was the only one stubborn enough to fight it. I locked up the cabin, poured myself another cup of bitter coffee, and started a logbook. Date, time, every citation, every threat. If Delilah Cromwell wanted a fight, I'd make sure there was a record of every punch she threw. Pop used to say, "The land picks you, not the other way around." Standing there on the porch in the cold, I finally understood what he meant. This wasn't just dirt and water. It was blood and memory. And I wasn't about to let some power-drunk neighbor in designer heels erase 60 years of family history with a stack of bogus citations. The first crack of wood on the dock wasn't an accident. It was a warning. And I don't do warnings. The next morning, I found a bright yellow envelope nailed to my porch rail. Notice of violation in heavy block letters, the kind you can see from across the yard. According to Delilah Cromwell, my cabin, a structure that predates the HOA by 3 decades, was compromising community aesthetics and endangering property values. Fine, $500. Due in 72 hours. I laughed at first. Then the second envelope came, taped to my truck window. Unauthorized solar installation. Non-compliant garden structure.
hazardous porch railing. Each one came with a fine and an impossible deadline. By the end of the week, I owed $3,000 on paper, not to a bank or a court, but to a neighbor who wore her HOA badge like a crown. When I tried to explain the absurdity to my neighbors, I got polite nods and cold eyes. The Hendersons, who'd lived across the inlet for 23 years, suddenly needed to downsize and sold their cabin to a mysterious cash buyer. Tom and Susan Martinez stopped waving from their dock. Even the mailman avoided eye contact, dropping envelopes like they were evidence at a crime scene. It wasn't just about fines. It was about pressure. One night, just past midnight, I caught the glint of headlights sweeping across my yard. Someone parked at the edge of the tree line, engine idling, watching. When I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, the car peeled out without even killing its lights. The gravel spray hit my mailbox so hard it rattled on its post. The next morning, Comply or Leave was back, this time burned into my lawn with weed killer. I kept hearing Pop's voice in my head, when someone wants your land real bad, Marcus, find out why. So I did what he would have done, I went digging. Literally. Down in the county records basement, where the air smelled of mildew and old ink, a clerk named Betty helped me pull every survey and deed tied to my property. The original plat map from 1963 showed something Delilah clearly didn't want anyone to remember: my grandfather's lot extended 50 feet past the shoreline. My dock wasn't on community waterway. It was sitting squarely in my lake. Armed with those documents, I drove home feeling 10 feet tall until I found her Escalade parked sideways across my driveway like a barricade. I tapped on her tinted window. "Move your car." She rolled it down 2 inches. "Just reviewing community parking regulations, sweetie. Could take a while." Her perfume, sharp and chemical, drifted out like poison. I clenched my jaw, forcing calm. "You're trespassing." She smiled without showing teeth. "You're welcome to call the sheriff. I'll have Chad swing by. He's family." The message was clear: her nephew wore the badge. If I wanted help, I wouldn't find it in uniform. That week turned into a parade of inspections. A building inspector I'd worked alongside on union jobs showed up with an apologetic face and a clipboard. 3 hours crawling through my attic, measuring rafters and noting code numbers. Conclusion? Perfectly safe. The next day, an environmental officer accused my septic system of contaminating the lake, also false. Then the fire marshal arrived to check hazardous solar wiring. All clean. But every inspection left a paper trail that made me look like a problem. Meanwhile, Delilah played her part in public. Channel 7 ran a community spotlight segment showing carefully cropped photos of my cabin, claiming unsafe structures threatening neighborhood children. She stood on my dock, the same one she'd vandalized, and called herself a defender of family values. The phone buzzed nonstop with angry messages from neighbors who believed every word. "Why are you fighting this? Just pay the fines. You're making us all look bad." I spent that evening on the porch, staring at the lake, wondering if I was crazy to keep fighting. Maybe I should just write a check, tear down the dock, swallow my pride. But then I remembered the Hendersons, packed up and gone overnight. They'd lived here longer than anyone, yet Delilah had made them vanish like they never existed. That cold weight in my stomach turned to iron. This wasn't about a dock. This was a play, and I was standing on the one piece of land she couldn't buy. When Betty called from the clerk's office 2 days later, her voice was shaking. "Marcus, I cross-checked HOA filings with state records like you asked. Something's not right. Their numbers don't add up. Not even close." That's when it clicked. Delilah Cromwell wasn't just power drunk. She was running something bigger, and I had just painted a target on my back. 2 weeks after that first yellow envelope, I was sitting at Pop's oak table, sorting through a pile of bogus citations, when something in the fine print caught my eye. All fines payable to Lakeside Estates Community Improvement Fund, account number 847291. It looked official enough, but something about it nagged me. Pop always said the devil lives in the details. That afternoon, I drove back to the courthouse, back to Betty in her dusty records office. She knew me by name now. "Marcus," she said, peering over her glasses, you're becoming my favorite detective. I slid the citation across her counter. Ever seen an HOA use an account number like this? She frowned, tapped at her computer, then disappeared into a stack of filing cabinets. 10 minutes later, she laid out a set of HOA financial reports. Here's the thing, she whispered. They're required to file these annually. But these numbers, she tapped the page with a pen, don't make sense. They've collected almost $300,000 in assessments for lake repairs that never happened. Where'd the money go? Betty's mouth tightened. That account? It isn't registered as a community fund. It's a personal business account opened under a company called Clearwater Property Solutions. Registered to a P.O. box in the same district where Delilah Cromwell lives. The words hit me like cold water. This wasn't petty HOA power tripping. This was theft. I photocopied everything, financial statements, tax filings, even copies of storm damage insurance claims on days when the weather had been perfectly clear. Walking out with that evidence, I felt my hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the weight of it. By the time I reached my truck, my phone was buzzing with messages, neighbors sharing screenshots of Delilah's latest Facebook post. Urgent community warning, aggressive resident refuses to comply with safety measures. Please keep children away from the eastern shore. The comments were vicious. Strangers I'd waved to for years called me unstable, dangerous. Someone even suggested I should be removed before tragedy strikes. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, trying to drown the bitterness in the sound of the loons. I wasn't just fighting for my cabin anymore. I was fighting for my name. The next morning, things escalated. My solar panels, which had run flawlessly since installation, suddenly died. When my buddy Jake, a master electrician, popped the panel open, he found wire connections deliberately loosened. This isn't wear and tear, he muttered, snapping photos. This is sabotage. Professional sabotage. I barely had time to process that before I found my boat drifting half a mile across the lake, its chains cleanly cut. Later that week, my septic system backed up with industrial chemicals strong enough to kill the bacteria and poison the ground. The repair bill? Over $3,000. The message couldn't be clearer: stop digging. But I didn't stop. I started documenting everything: photographs, timestamps, even samples of the septic contamination. Every act of vandalism went into a growing folder marked evidence. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Marcus, said Chuck Davis, an old high school buddy turned lawyer. You sitting down? Why? I just came from a meeting with the Attorney General's office. They're investigating HOA fraud rings across the state, harassment campaigns, embezzlement, political cover-ups. Sound familiar? The room tilted a little as I gripped the phone. What are you saying, Chuck? I'm saying you're not crazy. And you're not alone. They need witnesses. People who've documented the harassment, people like you. I stared out at the lake as his words sank in. For the first time in weeks, the anger in my chest shifted into something sharper: purpose. But purpose comes with risk. That night, headlights cut across my yard again, only this time they didn't leave. Someone sat at the edge of the property, engine humming, until I stepped out with Pop's old shotgun slung over my shoulder. Then they peeled away, tires spitting gravel like a warning shot. I went back inside, locked the door, and spread the evidence across the table. Citations. Financial records. Photos of vandalism. Everything I'd need to show that this wasn't a neighborhood dispute, it was a criminal conspiracy. For the first time, I realized what I had in my hands. Not just proof to save my cabin. Proof to bring Delilah Cromwell down. The question was, could I survive long enough to use it? By the end of March, my grandfather's cabin didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like an outpost in hostile territory. Every night brought new threats, spray-painted warnings, phone calls that went dead when I answered, strange vehicles idling at the edge of the property. Jake stopped by one afternoon, dropping a box of security cameras on my porch. Marcus, she's not just trying to scare you. She's trying to break you. Let's make sure she leaves fingerprints when she does.
We spent the day wiring hidden cameras into the eaves, the tree line, even the electrical panel she'd sabotaged. The hum of my solar inverter, normally comforting, now sounded like a tripwire. That evening, Chuck Davis returned, this time with a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s and a younger man with a quiet, coiled energy.
"Marcus," Chuck said, "meet Sarah Mitchell and David Bennett. State Attorney General's office." Sarah spread my growing evidence pile across the dining table. "Mr. Henley, what you've documented isn't just HOA abuse. It's fraud, extortion, and racketeering. And it's not isolated, we've got cases in 4 other counties with the same pattern."
David scrolled through photos on his tablet, connecting dots I hadn't seen.
Shell companies. Fake invoices. Cash buyers moving in as homeowners get pushed out. Classic property flip scam.
I leaned back in Pop's chair, letting it all sink in.
"So this isn't about me?" Sarah shook her head. "It's about everyone.
You're just the one stubborn enough to stand still while she pushes."
That word, stubborn, hit me harder than it should have.
Pop used to call it our family curse.
But stubbornness had a cost.
The next morning, Jake found his contracting license under review after an anonymous complaint. Bill Carter, the retired judge who'd been giving me legal advice, got a formal grievance filed with the state bar. Even the local VFW post, the only place I still felt welcome, got hit with a surprise fire inspection threatening to shut them down.
Delilah wasn't just coming for me anymore. She was coming for anyone who stood next to me.
One evening, as the sun burned orange across the lake, I sat on the porch with Sarah Mitchell. She was reviewing my notes when I finally said what had been eating at me for days.
"This fight's costing people. Good people."
She didn't look up.
"That's what people like Cromwell count on. You feeling guilty. You giving up." I stared at the water. What if they're right? What if I should just walk away? Sarah closed the notebook.
"Marcus, I've seen men lose their homes, their health, even their families to people like her.
You've got something they didn't prove. And we can use it. But you have to decide if you're willing to put yourself on the line."
I thought of Pop's words again, the land picks you, not the other way around.
Walking away would mean betraying everything he'd built. I nodded. "What do you need me to do?" The plan took shape quickly. FBI agent Rebecca Torres joined our next meeting via video call. "We've been tracking HOA corruption rings for months," she said. "Your documentation fills a critical gap.
But we need her to incriminate herself in real time."
Chuck leaned forward.
"Marcus, we're arranging a meeting between you and the Attorney General.
At your cabin.
If Delilah's as obsessive as you say, she won't be able to resist crashing it."
"Won't she smell a setup?" I asked. "Not if she's desperate," Torres replied. "And from what we've seen, she's already unraveling."
She proved them right within days. My cameras caught her creeping through the yard at 3 a.m., a screwdriver in one hand, wire cutters in the other. Jake's footage showed her loosening connections inside my solar panel box. 2 nights later, she poured industrial drain cleaner into my septic system. The technician who fixed it held up a corroded pipe and shook his head.
"This stuff isn't cheap.
Whoever did this wanted to ruin you, not just scare you." Every act of sabotage went straight into the evidence file. And every night, I felt the noose tightening, not around me, but around her. Still, the pressure was brutal.
Sleep came in short bursts.
The metallic taste of stress lived on my tongue. When my phone buzzed, I braced for bad news: another neighbor turning against me, another false police report, another drive-by patrol from Deputy Chad Cromwell.
I wasn't just fighting to save my cabin anymore.
I was fighting to save everyone Delilah had crushed.
The trap was set. Law enforcement in position. Cameras rolling.
Now we just had to wait for her to take the bait. And if I was wrong, if she didn't bite, then all this would be for nothing. The morning air was razor-sharp, the lake like black glass under a thin veil of mist. Inside Pop's cabin, the dining table had turned into a war room: papers, photographs, hidden recorders blinking red like fireflies in the shadows. Attorney General Patricia Williamson sat in Pop's recliner, calm as granite. She looked more like a school principal than the state's top prosecutor, but her eyes missed nothing.
FBI agent Rebecca Torres stood by the window, earpiece in place, murmuring updates to the undercover team spread across the shoreline.
"Mr. Henley," Williamson said, flipping through my file, "your documentation is the backbone of this case.
What happens today isn't just about you. It's about setting a precedent. Homeowners need to see that they're not powerless."
I nodded, gripping a mug of coffee I couldn't seem to drink. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The distant growl of an engine cut through the quiet.
Torres glanced at her watch. Right on schedule. Outside, gravel crunched under the weight of Delilah Cromwell's pearl-white Escalade.
She didn't pull in slow, she came barreling up the drive, throwing a rooster tail of stone against my truck.
Doors slammed.
Voices barked instructions about camera angles.
"She brought a crew," Torres muttered. "Perfect."
Through the cabin window, I caught sight of her tailored blazer, phone already live-streaming, lips painted into that same thin smile I'd seen on my porch the first day she threatened me. "She's about to make a career-ending entrance," Williamson said evenly, rising to her feet. The heels came first, sharp, impatient clicks on my porch, then her voice, swelling with righteous fury for her audience.
"Folks, you're about to see the corruption I've been talking about. The state's attorney general meeting in secret with a harasser on private property. Positions," Torres whispered into her mic.
Around the lake, engines purred to life.
Crash.
The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Delilah didn't hesitate, she marched into the cabin like she owned it, phone held high, streaming to thousands.
"I demand to know what's going on here," she shouted. "This is government persecution. You have no authority." Williamson didn't even flinch.
She held out her badge like a drawn blade. "Mrs. Cromwell, I'm the Attorney General of this state. You've just committed criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and obstruction of justice, all live, on your own broadcast." The words hit her like a slap.
For the first time, Delilah faltered.
The practiced outrage cracked, replaced by something raw panic. "Wait, this is harassment," she stammered, swinging her phone wildly.
"I have rights. My husband is under investigation," Torres said, stepping through the shattered doorway flanked by 2 federal agents.
"And thanks to this little performance, you've just given us probable cause for arrest on fraud, extortion, and witness intimidation." Her phone wobbled, comments scrolling faster than her mind could keep up.
The same strangers she'd manipulated were now watching her unravel in real time.
"This isn't over," she shrieked as Torres read her Miranda rights.
"You don't know who you're dealing with." "Actually," Williamson said coolly, "we do. That's why you're going to prison." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the cabin like the closing of a vault.
The camera in her own hand caught everything, her badge flashing uselessly, her eyes wide with disbelief as her world collapsed.
Outside, neighbors gathered, drawn by the commotion. Mrs.
Patterson stood on my porch steps with tears in her eyes as Delilah Cromwell, self-appointed queen of Clearwater Lake, was led away past the same dock she'd tried to destroy, past the solar panels she'd sabotaged, past the mailbox where she'd left her threats. As the Escalade was hitched to a tow truck, evidence now, Delilah's livestream cut off mid-scream. For the first time in months, the air around my cabin felt light again. Williamson turned to me, brushing splinters off her sleeve. "Mr. Henley," she said, almost smiling, "I hope you like testifying. We're about to make an example out of her." I looked down at the door she'd kicked apart, then at the calm lake beyond. Pop's words whispered back, "Sometimes the little guy wins because he fights for something bigger than himself."
I thought I was fighting to save a cabin. I was really fighting to save a community.
And for the first time, I knew we were going to win. 3 months later, I stood outside the federal courthouse in a crisp spring wind, watching Delilah Cromwell shuffle up the marble steps in ankle chains. Her pearl-white Escalade was long gone, seized as evidence. The designer heels were replaced with state-issued shoes that didn't click so confidently on stone. The judge didn't just sentence her, he dismantled her entire kingdom. 3 years in federal prison. Restitution for every homeowner she'd defrauded.
a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in the country. Her husband, Robert, resigned in disgrace after his own conviction for conspiracy and abuse of office. When the gavel fell, there wasn't applause, just a silence heavy with relief. The kind you feel after a storm finally blows itself out. I didn't smile. Not right away. Because the truth is, watching someone go to prison isn't satisfying the way movies make it seem.
It doesn't erase the months of threats, the friends you almost lost, or the nights you slept with one eye open.
Justice is quieter than that, like a lake after the wind dies down. The HOA dissolved overnight.
In its place, the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Association formed, no mandatory dues, no citation authority, no neighborhood dictators. Just neighbors helping neighbors.
The families Delilah had driven out started coming back.
The Hendersons bought a cabin 2 lots down from mine, at its true value this time. Mrs. Patterson returned from Florida and threw a block party that ran past midnight. Even the Martinezes, who'd once crossed the street to avoid me, brought over a basket of homemade bread and an apology.
The lake healed itself, one quiet act at a time.
A month later, Attorney General Williamson called me to her office in the state capitol. I figured she wanted to shake my hand and close the book. Instead, she slid a folder across her desk with my name on it. "The Henley Act," she said simply.
"Mandatory audits for every HOA in this state. Criminal penalties for harassment tied to property manipulation. We used your case as the model."
I just stared at the paper.
My name, in black ink, woven into state law.
I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Pop would have loved this. There was more. The federal government awarded me whistleblower compensation from the recovered funds, enough to repair every bit of damage Delilah caused and then some. I used part of it to start Pop's Legacy Scholarship, small grants for kids entering trade schools.
Pop always said an honest pair of hands could build anything. Now, a new generation would prove him right.
One evening, as the sun bled gold over Clearwater Lake, I sat on the same porch where this all began. The dock was repaired, the mailbox repainted, and the only sound was the hum of my solar panels and the call of loons across the water.
Sarah Mitchell from the Attorney General's office stopped by on her way back from town.
She leaned on the porch rail, looking at the lake.
"You did good, Marcus." I shook my head. "We did good. I just refused to move." She smiled. "Sometimes that's enough."
When she left, I stayed out there long after dark, listening to the water lap against the shore.
No headlights in the tree line.
No spray paint on the mailbox.
No heels clicking on the dock at dawn.
The quiet felt different now, not fragile, but earned. I ran my hand along Pop's old leather chair before heading inside. In the margin of his worn Bible, next to the story of David and Goliath, he'd written, "Sometimes the little guy wins because he fights for something bigger than himself."
I finally understood what he meant. This fight was never just about a cabin.
It was about memory, community, and refusing to let fear own the land beneath your feet. The lake was still. The night was calm. And for the first time in a long time, so was I.